Hello YouTube. So I recently did an Ask Me Anything response video where I mentioned that I am no longer afraid of death. So I used to be absolutely terrified of death, or more specifically, I used to be absolutely terrified of permanent non-existence. Not so much the process of dying, although I'm sure that has a good chance of being pretty unpleasant. But no, the idea that I will one day just not exist anymore, and I will never come into existence again. Permanent non-existence, permanent oblivion. That used to fill me with a sense of overwhelming dread and terror, and this has been significantly reduced in just in the past couple of months. And people keep badgering me to explain why that is. What is it that convinced me to change my attitude here? So I mean, look. Here's the thing. This is a result, really, of a kind of argument. I thought through a particular kind of argument, and that made me change. That changed how I felt. There is a problem with doing this kind of video, though, because this argument might be wrong. It might be really stupid. Maybe I've just missed something obvious, and you guys might point that out in the comments. And of course, if you point out that what I'm saying is stupid, then the argument will lose its force, and I'll become afraid of death again. And I don't really want that to happen. I'd rather have a false belief about this and live happily in ignorance than know the truth and go back to just being consumed with terror basically every night. So there is a risk to this, but I'll put it out there anyway, and well, so be it. If you guys end up making me change my mind. So why did I lose my fear of death? The primary reason was it came about as a result of thinking about mystical experiences. Now, I've never had any kind of mystical experiences myself, and I also think that a great deal of reports of mystical or religious experiences just seem like nonsense. However, um, there are a certain class of mystical experiences, and I think these would be. I mean, there's sort of slightly different types, but we might call them non-dualistic experiences or emptiness experiences. I think there's actually a distinction between them. But these are the sorts that you find in the in sort of Buddhist traditions, in Zen and so on. And I have a video where I spoke to another YouTuber called Unknown Knowns Philosophy, where he sort of talks about his own mystical experiences. It was actually a result of that conversation. It was, thinking thinking through some of the things that were brought up in that conversation that have that caused me to lose my fear of death. So it's these types of experiences, sort of non-dualistic emptiness, that sort of stuff. Essentially, experiences where people, I guess, what happens is that they lose the sense of self. So it's almost like It's like they have the experience, the direct experience of non-self. Those types of experiences. So. Um, so here are the relevant points. I know that the people who have these experiences end up with a reduced fear of death. I mean, that seems to be pretty consistent among people who have these experiences. Is one of the main things that they report is that it reduces their fear of death. Um, I also know that people who have these experiences very often report them in terms of, so they don't usually see them as being, like dreams or hallucinations or whatever. They will usually report them in terms of sort of accessing reality in some deeper way than is achieved in normal perception. They'll talk about them in terms of like waking up. So, when you have this experience, it feels like you are waking up, and then you come to see sort of the world, the sort of normal world full of selves and objects and properties. That seems like an illusion in comparison, right? So there's this sense of kind of waking up to reality, um, and or waking from a dream. Now, so that's how people report them. Now, so right, they feel like they have some some sense of access to reality that we don't have in normal perception, and they end up with a reduced fear of death. Okay, well that's interesting. Now the question is, what do I do with this information? Because one thing I could do is I could just sort of reject it. I could say, well, these experiences are probably hallucinations, or they're a result of pathology, or confusion, or maybe people are just like under extreme stress, or so like they're not thinking properly. I could do that. And, I mean, no doubt you can kind of come up with particular sort of physicalist models of what's going on in the brain when people have these experiences. You can just assume that, like, well, no, like normal perception that provides access to the real world, and then insofar as you have sort of brain states that deviate from that, well, you could just any experiences as a result, you can just treat them as hallucinations. I could do that. But here's the thing. So there's a few things about these experiences that make it difficult to do that. So the first thing is that when people have these experiences, very often there is no obvious pathology. There's no brain damage. I mean, maybe sometimes there is, but not always, right? Like they happen to people who are perfectly healthy, people who are perfectly able to engage in sort of reasoning and normal perception, and who can sort of think and act and perceive in just the same way I can. They'll happen sometimes to people who are relatively normal. The other thing is that you often find that people who are the sort of secular people will sometimes report these types of experiences too. And very often they don't, as a result of this, become religious. So the experience will affect them significantly, but it's not like somebody is an atheist and then they have this experience and then they're like, oh, I spoke to God and now I believe in God. That doesn't happen. I mean, again, I don't know the sort of data on mystical experiences and the sort of how people react to them. I'm not sure of the exact data on this, but I do know there are plenty of people who are secular, they have these experiences, and that doesn't radically transform their sort of normal beliefs about the world, or their beliefs about how or at least it doesn't sort of make them start believing in claims that I would otherwise find absurd. Um, and I mean, I guess this is the other, actually the most important point, right? Is that the people who have these experiences are not reporting anything that I have independent reason to reject. I mean, so this is, I think, a kind of key thing. And well, I do need to state this with some care, because there are many reports of mystical experience that are just nonsense. So if somebody comes to me and they start talking about how they have communicated with God, or they felt touched by God, or something like that, or if they start talking about how they were, communicating with tree spirits, yeah, I don't buy any of that, right? That's what if you're talking in those terms, then you're going to be invoking, a kind of ontology or a metaphysics that I find deeply implausible. And I think there are, I have good reasons to reject that. So if somebody was saying that kind of stuff, then I would have good reason to sort of just dismiss their experience, or at least say, well, that's maybe just a hallucination. But not all experiences are like this. So that's why I said at the beginning, what I'm talking about here are these kind of non-dualistic experiences, these emptiness experiences, these experiences of non-self. That doesn't invoke any particular metaphysical framework that I have reason to reject. I mean, they're just I have no objection, to what is being claimed. In fact, it has been pointed out to me that in many ways what's being claimed here, what's being revealed in this experience, it's like the experiential correlate, as it were, of conclusions that I've already accepted, like philosophically, right? So there are conclusions that I've accepted as a result of philosophical argument, and the point is that what these experiences are like. These are like a direct experience of that. So, you know, I I take a sort of nominalist or constructivist view of objects, including selves. I mean, I've often said, like, for me, how we draw the line between how we kind of draw the line of personal identity, of what makes a self, right? That's pragmatic. It's up to us, right? It's not like there's some independent fact of the matter about how to do that. So I mean, look, I won't go into this too much, but I got a video called "Classification and Kinds: An Anti-Realist View," where I talk about this in a bit more detail. Also, things like the problem of the many, for instance, I got another video on that. So the point is that, you know, I already accept a kind of constructivism or nominalism about the self, and indeed about, you know, objects in general. So the mystical experience, where, you know, where you have this non-self experience, or this non-dualistic experience, you know, that does seem, well, maybe that's like the experiential correlate of that. It's like, well, you know, what if you could sort of have an experience of reality where we're not, where we're just, it's where we're not drawing the lines. It's like, you know, an experience of the world which is like unconditioned by our by our tendency to sort of draw lines between things and construct kinds. So anyway, the point is, it's not simply that the people reporting these experiences are, you know, it's not just that they're not reporting stuff that I have reason to reject. It's that actually what they're reporting may well be the experiential correlate of conclusions that I've already come to. So, moreover, you know, I think that it does seem that we find this type of experience cropping up in lots of different traditions. So, of course, you know, if somebody is a Christian and they have an experience like this, they may well describe it in terms of coming into contact with God. But there does seem to be a sort of, I don't know, there seems to be like a sort of core experience, a core type of experience, which is then maybe interpreted in different ways after the fact. But that, you know, if you ask people to sort of describe the core experience, that seems to be something that crops up in lots of different societies. I could be wrong about that. There's a big debate about this. It's the perennialist versus constructivist debate. But, you know, at the very least, as I mentioned, you find it in the Buddhist tradition, and you also find it in, you know, among people who are just sort of secular, right? It does happen in people, you know, in the West who have no particular spiritual inclinations beforehand. So, with all of this said, then, so here's where I guess I stand. You know, I'm an empiricist, or at least I try to be. You know, my beliefs about the world, my reactions to the world are based on experience. And the testimony of others is relevant to that. Well, yeah, in general, I don't know how I would live if I just refused ever to trust the testimony of other people. There are circumstances where it seems reasonable to trust what other people are telling you. So the question is, do I trust these reports of mystical experience? Well, I mean, I have no particular reason not to. Indeed, they seem to conform in some ways quite nicely with the sort of broader worldview that I have. So I know. So here's what I know. I know that the people who have these experiences end up with a reduced fear of death. I know that they don't take them to be hallucinations. I know that if I were to have a mystical experience, which I mean, it could happen, who knows, I would regard it as more than a mere hallucination, and I would probably end up with a reduced fear of death. So with that in mind, what's the point in waiting, right? What's the point? Why should I wait for one of these experiences to occur in order to give up my fear of death? I mean, I might as well just give it up now. Because it's like, so if you're scared of something, if you're like absolutely terrified of something in the future, right? But then imagine, you know, some oracle comes down and tells you, well, look, tomorrow you are going to receive some information which will remove your fear of that thing. You're no longer going to be scared of it. I'm not going to tell you what exactly that information is, but you do know, like tomorrow, you're going to get some information that will reduce your fear. Well, it seems like that would probably immediately reduce your fear. I mean, maybe it wouldn't eliminate it entirely, but it would go some way towards reducing your fear. Like if there's something in the future you're terrified of, but then you're told that tomorrow you're going to receive information which will reduce your fear. I think that would just that would be enough to reduce your fear at least a little bit. And I mean, to be clear, my fear of death has not been totally eliminated. I don't want to die, and if I was offered the choice, I would still take immortality. But it has been reduced. So that's what I'm saying. It's been reduced. It doesn't bother me so much anymore. It's death now is, to me, it's something that I certainly, well, I don't want it to happen, but there's lots of things that I don't want to happen. There are many things in the world that are frustrating to me, right? And now death has become just another one of those things. It no longer kind of grips me with this, like, just over. It's no longer like this shadow over everything I do, which is what it was before. Like everything, everywhere I turned, everything I felt and everything I looked at, it felt like it was just, in the shadow of death. Every time I looked at a clock, I could feel my life being consumed, and that's not the case anymore. Um, so, I mean, look, there are sort of, I suppose, um, problems with what I've said. So, I'll just kind of mention a couple. I mean, so one issue that maybe that we might have with this mystical experience stuff is there is a kind of maybe sort of lack of public checkability. I mean, so maybe this is a bit of a tangent, but this is something that came up when I read this book. I can't remember who wrote it. As I get older, my memory gets worse. If this was 5 years ago, I would know the name like that because I read the book only like 3 months ago or something. Anyway, it's called DMT, the spirit molecule, and it's the fella who, what the hell was his name? The weird thing is that the only name in my head right now is Richard Stallman, but I'm pretty sure it's not. Isn't he something to do with technology, or he's something to do with computers? Isn't he Richard Stallman? There's no way that this guy is called Richard Stallman, but the book is called DMT, the Spirit Molecule, and it was about this fella's uh, research into DMT. I think it was like back in the 80s or something. And when you gave people DMT, one of the things that was interesting was that they would often talk about their experiences as being sort of, sometimes like more real than perception. So when they had these DMT experiences, they would say, it was like accessing another world, or in fact, it was like waking up, from another world. So, and he mentioned in the book that initially he just kind of took it as hallucinations, but that as the research went on, he found that it was a lot easier to sort of communicate with people about it if he just at least acted as if what they were reporting really was real, that they really were, they really were accessing some other realm, right? Um, and the thing is, I felt as I was reading this, I got very frustrated because I was like, well, there's an easy way to check this, isn't there? Like, you could do an experiment where you sort of, I don't know, you separate the subjects and then you administer them the sort of same dose of DMT, and then you ask them their experiences afterwards. And, like, if they're reporting things that are relevantly similar, like, imagine if you had two subjects completely separated, they never come into contact with each other, but then after but they're like, um, they're close together in sort of different rooms, but they're separated in different rooms, but otherwise they're close together. And then they report things like, I don't know, they both report seeing 10 people or 10 entities, and those entities say the same things in both reports, or like, one of them's wearing a blue shirt and one of them's wearing a red shirt, and then the bloke with the red shirt reports seeing somebody in a blue shirt, that kind of thing, right? If they both reported similar things like that, well, that then it's like, wow, that would be a massive conceptual revolution. Like, we would have some reason to believe, at least, that maybe DMT actually does give us access to different realities. Like, it's and what's happening there is it's this kind of public accessibility that there's that's our criterion for what counts as a real world. When you get more than one person reporting relevantly similar features, we're like, okay, this isn't just something going on in somebody's head. This is people perceiving something happening in reality. Um, at least that, I mean, that wouldn't be like, that kind of evidence wouldn't be conclusive, but it would at least be a first step. And I was really annoyed. I don't think anyone's ever done this. It seems like an obvious thing we could do, and it's extremely annoying to me that no one's done that. Because how cool would that be? Imagine if that turned out to be the case. It would be incredible. It would completely overthrow our picture of reality. So I mean, maybe it's a long shot, but it seems like it would be worth doing. So anyway, as I say, this is a bit of a tangent because this is just me rambling about how we need to do DMT experiments where we try to show that there's some sort of public accessibility with respect to the DMT entities. The point of this is that it's not obvious how this kind of criterion applies in the case of mystical experiences. And I mean, part of the problem here is that in mystical experiences, you you lose the self, right? I mean, this is what I said, right? These experiences seem to be like a direct experience of non-self. But if you lose the self, then like if the very notion of different selves has dissolved, then like public accessibility, the idea of like more than one person accessing this just doesn't make any sense anymore. Um, and I mean, with these sorts of experiences, it's also the case that there's not really anything to access. So, um, the like it's not like there are a bunch of objects and properties that reveal themselves. Instead, like all of those boundaries just break down. So it's either the case that there's this, I guess, sense of just undifferentiated reality, non-dualistic, right? So there's no longer any oppositions between things, or it's the case that there's this emptiness, that there's like nothingness, but somehow nothingness is it's not nothing in the usual sense of nothing. It's like a tangible nothingness. I don't really know. I mean, it doesn't. I've never had these experiences, and I assume even if you did have these experiences, it would be very difficult to communicate it in propositions in language like I'm doing now. So okay, maybe there's this issue where there isn't this public checkability in the same sense, but how could there be? Um, I guess you might sort of also worry that look, these sorts of experiences, they don't like fit they don't have like coherence with our broader models of the world, or at least models that are empirically well supported. I mean, so what's described in a mystical experience doesn't really fit into like a causal mechanistic framework. That's not really such an issue for me because, well, I mean, I tend to be an anti-realist about scientific theories and models anyway. I can see why, if somebody is really committed to like a physicalist metaphysics, they would be less moved by the sort of considerations that I have made here. So, I mean, if you think, for instance, that like you take a sort of Quinean view and you say, well, the criterion of ontological commitment is whatever is indispensable to our best theories and models, and then those theories and models are going to be judged in terms of empirical adequacy, simplicity, explanatory power, all that stuff, right? So if you come at it from that sort of, I guess, scientistic sort of framework, then yeah, I guess you probably would just model mystical experiences as being just a kind of hallucination. Again, that's not such a that isn't really a consideration for me because that's not the sort of approach I take anyway. Um, so yeah, I look, I've thought through this for a little while, and the result has been that I have lost my fear of death. So that's why. That's why. I mean, I should note. Look, there is a pretty major bias here. Okay, because I was desperately terrified of death. I mean, I can't. I really. I mean, it's almost inexpressible, right? The sense of just utter horror, terror, dread, right? That death produced, specifically permanent non-existence, right? I mean, it was a totally unique type of fear as well, because usually when you experience fear, the usual thing that happens is that it's you kind of get like you sort of shake and the pulse quickens, I've had panic attacks and stuff, right? And so like I know what that feels like. You feel like the rapid heart rate, and it's everything feels fast and and urgent. What's different though is that when I would get this fear of death, it's a completely different sort of process. It would usually happen maybe like at night, or if I'm on my own. I'd sort of start thinking about it. I'd start thinking about non-existence, and I would feel my pulse slow down, and so it wasn't like a panic attack, like a normal panic attack. It was this just wave of dread, and it was like slow, and so yeah, it was different to a normal fear, and it was horrible. And the point is, look, now what I have seen here is I have seen a way out of that. I have seen some relief from that, and I have taken it. So this might be maybe this is a stupid argument, but I'd rather just stick with this than go back to that sort of terror. The interesting thing is, I was never even remotely tempted by any sort of religious position or any kind of afterlife claim, despite this bias. Like, believe me, if there was an argument that was anywhere in the ballpark of being convincing for the claim that there's an afterlife or that there's a god or anything like that, I would have taken it. I would have had that. It's it's always amusing to me when you sometimes hear like theists and stuff talk about how people like atheists are sort of resisting God. I'm not resisting it. I would be overjoyed if there was a God and if there was an afterlife. But I just think all the arguments I've come across seem really shitty. So I can't get on board with that. Well, this argument doesn't seem shitty. It seems it seems okay. That's it. That's all I have to say about that. So thanks for watching. And yeah, that's all.